Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we've got an interesting one here. I have a speaker that was sent in that I kind of like. It's one of those that I feel like has good bones, meaning there's something here to work with and there's the ability to take it from where it is to a much higher level. This one, it was sent in by one of our customers. It is the Mofi 8. So it's the newer model, just down from the Mofi 10 that they originally introduced, using an 8-inch coaxial woofer. And this one, to me, there's pros and there's cons. There's a lot of good here, but a lot of room for improvement also. And it explains a lot of what I heard when I listened to the Mofi 10. And I listened to it several times, and I've listened to it really set up well in a good room. And there were some issues with that speaker that, to me, what I'm seeing in the Mofi 8 explains very well. In fact, from their website, it says that this speaker is offering the same level of sonic excellence as its larger sibling, referring to the Mofi 8. So that I take it that means that basically it's a smaller version of the same speaker. So let's kind of dig into what's here and look at what we've got to work with. Let's look at how it measures and all that kind of stuff, and just dig right in and see what we got here. First of all, the Mofi 8 cabinet. I like the surface of this thing. They didn't just do a flat baffle, and I hate it when you have a great big flat baffle because it causes a lot of surface reflection, and the surface reflection tends to draw attention to itself and make the speaker sound as if they are playing from the speaker. So this faceted design minimizes that, which I like. And the front baffle is fairly thick, so a nice solid front baffle on it. The grill is pretty interestingly made. It's all plastic formed, and it just fits over the front here, and it's held on magnetically. And it has kind of that same shape as the cabinet itself, which is pretty cool. And I'll show in a little bit the measurements on this thing, and the fact that the grill did not adversely affect the response that much, which is also good. So there was a lot into this one that was really well designed and really well engineered. Now, the cabinet is braced fairly well. There is bracing that runs through it just like this. It is a brace here and a brace here, and it goes all the way around the box. And then there's some sections cut out right above the ports that allow kind of the air to flow through. There's a port at the top, there's a port at the bottom. There's a binding post plate that goes on the back here that looks really nice, and some decent looking binding posts. Unfortunately, just like everything else you find in this category, you find steel nuts and washers on this thing, which obviously we're not big fans of putting a bunch of steel parts in the signal path. And then let's get to the driver. The driver, to me, is my favorite part of the speaker. It is a paper-based cone with a nice soft dome tweeter, a little cast frame, neodymium motor structure, and from the measurements I took on it, fairly well behaved. There's definitely some issues outside of the woofer's band, a little up high, and the tweeter's got a few issues too. Mainly just the fact that the tweeter uses the woofer as a giant waveguide. So the problem with that is, as the woofer moves, it changes the waveguide. I mean, in other words, the waveguide is moved out further or less further out as the woofer moves. And when we were doing the measurements on this, Hob decided, hey, let's stick a little 1.5 volt battery on this thing and let it pull the woofer all the way in or all the way out and see if it affects the response of the tweeter. And it did. So that's one of the drawbacks to using a coaxial design woofers. When that woofer's moving, it's affecting the tweeter's response, and it affected it right within an area where there's already a problem. So there's not really a lot you can do about that, other than, let's say this thing was a 3-way design and this woofer wasn't playing down very low, so it wasn't going through much movement, like as if it had 2 more 8-inch woofers below it, like their latest model, that would alleviate some of that problem. But I don't see that as being a great problem. it's something we always deal with when we're dealing with coaxial design drivers. But overall, I like the sound of this driver very much. It has a great sound. Now, the drawbacks. Just like every speaker out there built to a price point, especially those that are sold through a dealer network, it had this inside. So, and oddly enough, the information on the website said the Point Source series represents a tour de force in design and engineering. Well, I'll give it to you. The designing and engineering was great, and it's what I would expect from Andrew Jones, who is obviously one of the best designers out there. He always does a great job. Everything that we've measured of his stuff, it's always measured really well. But this is not tour de force. If you believe this is tour de force, then you probably believe all of their vinyl was mastered from original tapes and all analog in every stage. This is not tour de force. In fact, oddly enough, let's compare it to this crossover. The one in my hand here, in my right hand, is from a company known to put budget level parts in everything, and we've upgraded more of their speakers than every other company that we've done upgrades on. This is out of a Klipsch speaker. This is out of the Mofi 8. Notice the same level of parts in both of these. We see iron core inductors. We see not polypropylene caps. We see polyester film caps, sandcast resistors, one electrolytic cap that's in a notch filter. So this to me explains a lot of what I heard in the Mofi 10, which I thought overall was a pretty good sounding speaker. Really balanced, really smooth. This one also really smooth. We'll see that when we look at the measurements in a few minutes. But in the Mofi 10, one of the things I noticed was coloration in the bass. And it wasn't from a bloated bass or over-exaggerated, humped-up bottom. It measured really flat all the way through the bass. Even in the room that I heard it in, it measured really well. But there was a little bit of coloration there. And I remember when we blocked the ports, it knocked most of that coloration out of it, but then it had no bottom end at all. And it may be the same with this. I don't know if the coloration was coming from cabinet resonances. You know, this one is fairly well braced compared to other commercial speakers like it in this class. It's not super heavy braced like some of our kits that we designed, but it's fairly well braced. I'm thinking, though, that a sheet of no-res would certainly knock some of that out of this thing and damp it up a little bit there and control some of the bass notes. I don't know that this one would quite suffer from that problem as much as the 10 because the box is a little bit smaller, so it may not be as bad. The other issue that I had with the Mofi 10 was the openness in the way it sounded. The spatial cues, what I call spatial cues, that are all those airy details that create layering in the sound stage and positioning, were just not there. It's just that stuff was just gone. Whereas the actual resolution levels down low, because the tweeter was crossing at a pretty good range down low, was very clear and very, very precise, but all that airiness and openness wasn't there, and which is exactly what I would expect by looking at these parts. These parts are going to smear that top end, and it's not going to allow a lot of that detail to come through. And for me, it's apparent about that fast because I'm used to hearing that, and then when I listen to a speaker that doesn't have it, it's like, oh, well, I can hear sound from that speaker and that speaker, and it's very flat in the way it sounds. Other than in the vocal region. In the vocal region, the thing sounded nice and deep, and it had a really good sound in the vocal. In fact, I liked the way the vocal sounded. It wasn't as sharp and clear as the vocals that I'm used to, and a lot of the stuff that I hear a lot. As far as speed and decay, it wasn't as fast, but it was very warmed over and is very smooth. And a lot of that had to do with the paper cone woofer and the sound of that woofer. But there's also an iron core inductor that's in line with that thing. And iron core inductors do have a tendency to kind of warm the sound over a little bit. It smears the signal. You lose resolution and real detail there. in exchange for a whole lot cheaper. In fact, this coil is now being replaced by this large air core, which is a lot more expensive, and it's not made in China. These coils that we've selected for the upgrade are all 4/9 pure copper, made in the U.S., from U.S. coils, high quality stuff. Now, there is one coil in here that's really huge, and we can replace that with a Super Q that's a little bit bigger gauge. This is the smallest gauge that we carry. This is 18 gauge. Whereas this is maybe 21 gauge or 23. We call it dental floss gauge. It's probably thinner than dental floss. And we're going to talk about that more in a few minutes, because in the budget level version, you could pull this off of the circuit and reuse this in the notch filter area. But everything else we're going to replace in the upgrade. So before we dig into replacing the parts and stuff, let's look at the measurements on this thing and see what did it do and how did it measure. So let's look at the on-axis frequency response of this thing, which is very smooth. I mean, from end to end, it's really smooth. Now, if you look at the tweeter's response, though, right up there at 3K, you see a little bit of a peak. And if we look at the spectral decay on it, we see that there's definitely some stored energy there, and that bugged me a lot. When you hear a little bit of ringing, and that thing just rings like that, that's going to be audible, and you may not notice it right away. And if the tin had a little bit of resonance or ringing in that area, I didn't really notice it right away, or really at all in the music that I listened to. This is one of those things that's subtle, and in certain passages of music, you'll realize there's something there that's not supposed to be there. If you're used to listening to a speaker that doesn't have that ringing there, where it's just really fast and really clean, and then suddenly you hear a speaker that has that little residual ring, then it starts to draw attention to itself. It's like, I don't remember that being in the music right there. There's a little bit of ring there that wasn't there before. Now, if you're used to listening to some clip speakers or something where there's resonances and ringing going all over the place, suddenly this thing may sound super clean to you, because it really doesn't have any ringing or stored energy except just a little in that one area. So it's not bad. It was bad enough that I wanted to try and fix it a little bit, but there really wasn't much to do with it, because it's really narrow in the way that it's doing that, and it has to do with what's going on in the throat right here of the woofer. If you pulled the woofer cone in, it changed that a little bit right there in that area. So there's something going on right there in that little spot that's causing that little bit of ringing. But again, not that bad. Let's look at the horizontal off-axis. Now, the horizontal is going to be the same in every direction, because it's a coaxial design. So whether you go up or down, we're not changing the time alignment or anything in this thing. So it maintains a really smooth off-axis response, obviously in every direction. So that's good, and what that's going to do is it's going to help maintain an even in-room response or power response in the room. So your sidewall reflections, your ceiling, your floor is all the same as the on-axis response. So you're not dealing with huge dips and swings and holes in the response as you go in the vertical off-axis and things like that. Speaker like this is not going to have those issues. So it was great in that regard. I mentioned earlier the grill effect. Let's throw that measurement up and see how it looks with the grill, and you notice that it really doesn't change a whole lot once you throw the grill on there. So that was pretty good. Now, here's another thing that bugged me on this thing. Let's look at the impedance curve. You look at this thing, and what you're going to see is a humongous impedance rise right there at the crossover point, or where the crossover is creating more resistance there, and it shot up to 75 ohms. So that is pretty massive. Normally, we want to see an impedance curve that is smooth all the way across, so the amplifier sees the same load all the way across, not an uneven demand of current and load. That could cause it to sound different on some amplifiers versus other amplifiers. And it's causing a shift in phase. Electrically, the amplifier sees a shift in phase whenever the impedance goes through a dramatic swing like that. So that also can have some audible effect depending on the amplification. Now, next thing I did was let's look at the frequency response of the drivers without any crossover on them. So let's first look at the woofer's response. It looks pretty clean in its usable range, but as soon as you get up above, say, 3 kHz or so, there's a lot of ringing and breakup in this thing that gets a little out of whack, and it makes it unusable beyond that point. So we definitely need to cross it a little lower than that. Looking at the tweeter's natural response, no crossover, we see exactly what happens when you put a tweeter inside a cone or in a waveguide like this, or even a horn. It's going to increase the tweeter's output down low. So you have the tweeter's response and has a big rising response as frequency decreases, because it's causing some compression of the wave in those low frequencies. As the lows tend to spread out and be omnidirectional, it's compressed within that space and it increases amplitude. It's just like talking through a bullhorn does the same thing, same effect. So one of the good things about that is you can use a really small capacitor on it to bring the level down to flatten it out. And acoustically, it's still playing down low, but electrically, it's not seeing much low frequency at all. So as far as the excursion of the tweeter, you can minimize it by quite a bit by the way that it's loaded in this thing. And that's exactly what's going on here. Yeah, and let's look at the frequency response of each of those drivers. You can see exactly what I was talking about there, where the tweeter's got a rising response as it goes down. And the woofer has a fairly good response until you get up there a little bit. So my only issue with the thing was the big impedance rise, and right there at 3 kHz there's a little bit of ringing. So I thought, well, let me see what I can do with this. Maybe I can do a little notch filter in there and notch out that ringing, and that'll be gone. Well, it's really hard to notch out a really narrow band ringing there, and I'm sure if it was easy to notch it out, Andrew probably would have put something on it to notch it out as well, but it's not that bad, so I can't really dwell on that much. So I had to forget about that, and I thought then, well, maybe we just soften it a little bit right there, and that's basically what I did. There was no reason for me to redesign this crossover. This crossover was well designed. It's just built to a price point. It's using cheesy parts. So I took the exact same crossover and I tweaked a value or two just a little bit, and I did soften it in that 3 kHz region, and I did bring the tweeter level at the very top end up just a hair, because when you start going off axis, it's going to start dropping off. And so this speaker, I think, will sound best if it's not aimed right at your head. If it's maybe crossing past your shoulders, or maybe 10 degrees off of you being right on axis, and that's where it had the smoothest response. The smoothest response was 10 degrees off axis. But let's look at it. Let's look at the original frequency response, and then right below it, let's look at the frequency response after I tweaked the values just a little. Again, I just softened it in that 3 kHz region where that ringing is to just bring it down just a hair. And that's all I did to the frequency response. The rest is just as Andrew designed it. The voicing is going to sound exactly the same. We're just going to take what was there and we're going to bring it to a whole new level as far as resolution and detail levels, and improving the imaging and the layering in the sound stage and a whole bunch of those areas. The lower bass, we're going to tighten things up there. We're going to do a lot to the speaker and for the speaker, but the voicing of it is still exactly the same. Now, the other thing that I did to it was I added these 3 little parts here. I did a impedance trap at the front of the network. And let's take a look at that. Let's look at the original impedance and then look at the new impedance and look at the difference there with the impedance trap. In fact, I've also got a measurement where I overlaid it, where you can see the original and the new impedance all stacked here on one graph. And that's a pretty big difference. Now, let's put that together and what the amplifier sees and how it reacts and how it causes a shift in phase. Let's look at the original impedance measurement with an overlay of the phase response, and you can see the phase goes through a little wiggle there where it goes through quite a bit of degrees of phase rotation right there, versus let's look at the impedance with the trap on it, and you can see that the phase response is much more balanced all the way across. So made some nice improvements there smoothing things out. Crossover wise, let's throw that up there and just look at where the crossover point is. This was after I was done with it a little bit, and one of the values I adjusted was in the tweeter circuit. I made the second cap just a hair bigger, which took a little of the knee out of it that was causing that peak at 3K and let it roll off a little more gradually. So that's all I'd wound up doing to it there. These parts are going to be replaced by all of these parts. We're going to do an air core inductor on everything, JB poly caps, which is a big step up from the polyester film caps that are on here. And then in the tweeter circuit, I'm going to drop in a couple of little 0.1 bypass caps to improve the speed and resolution of the tweeter without adding much money to it. And instead of, I'm going to give you an option here. We're going to do an upgrade option on the upgrade. We're going to do a budget level, which is these parts you see right here, and it's going to reuse this coil. That means you're going to take this coil off and reuse it in the circuit because you can. This is going to be a subtle improvement going to this Super Q coil with a little bigger gauge, and you're only going to notice it down in the lower frequency range. This is a huge notch. I won't say huge notch. It's a little bit of a broad range notch filter, and it was notching the lower vocal out of it a little bit so that it's not so chesty sounding, and that's all it's doing right there. So doing that, these new parts, new high purity copper wire instead of this PVC jacketed stuff, no more push on connectors, high purity and polyethylene 16 gauge wire. We're going to do a set of tube connectors to replace these binding posts that have steel nuts on them, and we're going to do one sheet of no-res, and the sheet of no-res can be cut in strips and laid in all the way around this thing on the spaces between the brace, and that should tighten things up a little bit. And all of that comes to $446. And then we're going to do another option here where we're, instead of using the JB polycaps with bypasses on the tweeter circuit, we're going to give you a Sonicap option on this. And why not? This is a really well-designed speaker, and I like the drivers. These are good drivers, and this thing should sound really good, especially when we bring much higher quality detail levels to this tweeter. And we're going to throw in the Super Q coil, so we're going to completely have a whole new crossover with Sonicaps and the same new wiring, tube connectors, and sheet of no-res, and it comes to $680. And I know $680 is probably more than they spent building the whole speaker, but you know, these things sold for $26.95, and I think I saw them on sale right now for $19.95. And it's a pretty okay value, but I mean, you're still getting this. So don't think you're getting a high-end speaker. You're getting a well-designed speaker, and you're getting something with really good bones, but it needs this thrown in the garbage and some really good parts put in it. And I think this speaker is going to really transform, especially if you pull some of the bottom end out of it and dish that over to a sub. You're gonna get some really good results out of this speaker. So, fun little upgrade. Thumbs up to Andrew Jones, who did a great job on the design work on it. Again, just another speaker built to a price point, and I like this one. I like it a lot because the level of what can be done with it from where it is to where it can go is a really worthwhile jump. And I think all of you guys out there who have this, if you've got this speaker, you need this upgrade. This one's going to be very substantial. So that's it for this one. I think I covered everything. If you got any questions, drop them in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do. I really appreciate it. And hit the like button. And that's it for this one. See you guys in the next video.